Why knowing isn't enough? Understanding feels like progress. When you finally see what's going on, there's often a sense of relief. You name the pattern, you recognize the habit, you understand why things are the way they are. And for a moment, that feels like movement. But then, nothing changes. The behavior stays the same. The delay continues. The resistance doesn't lift. This is confusing, because we're taught that insight leads to action, that once we know better, we'll naturally do better. But psychologically, knowledge and change are not the same process. Insight happens at the level of awareness. Change happens at the level of safety. You can understand a pattern perfectly and still feel unable to move, because understanding doesn't tell the nervous system that action is safe. It only explains why you're stuck. For many people, insight actually increases pressure. Now you know what's wrong. Now you know what you should be doing. And that awareness turns into self-monitoring. Every delay feels more obvious. Every pause feels less justified. So instead of freeing movement, insight tightens the system. This is why people often say, "I know what I need to do. I just can't do it." It's not a lack of intelligence. It's not a lack of motivation. It's a mismatch between understanding and emotional readiness. The system doesn't change because it understands. It changes when the cost of action feels manageable, when the risk feels tolerable, when movement no longer threatens stability. Until then, insight stays intellectual, helpful, but incomplete. This doesn't mean insight is useless. It means it's only the first layer. Real change usually begins when understanding is followed by gentleness, smaller steps, lower expectations, less pressure to transform immediately. When insight stops being used as a reason to push harder and becomes a reason to soften, that's when knowing starts to translate into movement, not all at once, but enough to begin. Knowing creates awareness. But awareness alone doesn't lower the cost of action. That's why people can understand themselves deeply and still feel stuck in the same place. Insight explains the pattern. It doesn't negotiate with the nervous system. Change begins when understanding is paired with conditions that feel survivable. Smaller commitments, less urgency, lower emotional stakes. When action no longer feels like a threat, movement becomes possible, not because you finally figured it out, but because the system stopped bracing against it. This is why change often happens quietly, not in moments of realization, but in moments where pressure eases enough for action to feel safe. That's when knowing finally becomes enough to move.